what's made it so popular in our industry is that it is really interactive. So please do, do be interactive, do take part. We want to hear what you've got to say. As ever, I will introduce our guests in a moment, but I always like to start by just telling you about what we've got lined up for you next week, just to whet your appetite for what's coming up next week. And next week, I'm delighted to say, actually, there's a bit of a Dutch connection next week, because we've got two guests from the Netherlands. We've got Lynn Mekker, who is the head of global mobility for EMEA for Unilever, obviously a massive program, and Narendra Parthasarathy from Cognizant. And Narendra, again, handles a massive program with a huge amount of inbound and outbound to India in the Cognizant program. So two fascinating programs, two different industries, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of stuff to talk about between them and with them next week. So that's next week. But what about this week? Well, let me just tell you that immediately after the show today, we're going to do a demo. If anybody is interested, would like to come along to our demo. The reason we're doing that is that quite regularly people are saying to us, we've heard all about Beneva, we're quite interested just to see it. So if anybody's interested, then my colleague will put up online in the comments box a link, and you can register. I'm sure you can register on the Beneva website, and there's a live demo for anybody's interested in actually seeing the technology platform. But the other thing I just want to say whilst I'm talking about Beneva before we get going on the program itself is that we started last week a 2-weekly series called Beneva Bites, which is a technology update program. And last week we talked about creating an Amazon-style experience for mobility. Well, next week, so that's not tomorrow, that's tomorrow week, Thursday, I think it's the 16th, isn't it? We're going to be talking about creating a partner platform. And what we've launched, or what we will be launching, you'll see it in Thursday week, 8 days time, is a free partner platform for all assignees, all transferees, not just for those who get partner support, because we feel, especially in these days of diversity and inclusion, it's not enough just to be supporting the transferees. We need to support the spouses and the partners. So we've launched a free partner platform. Anyway, that's enough about what's coming up next week. And as I said, there is the demo that is immediately after this show. If anybody, it's at 1:15 the hour. So, and we'll finish on the hour. So, just a few minutes after we finish. But what I do want to do is tell you about our guest, and I'm delighted to say that our special guest today is Kerwin Guillermo. Now, Kerwin, I think, will be known to many of you. He is the head of global mobility at HPE, Hewlett Packard Enterprises, and he's also the incoming chair, the chair-elect at Worldwide ERC. So where are you? Let's see if we can bring Kerwin on stage. Kerwin, hey, how you doing?
Hello, hi. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Hi.
First of all, Kerwin, huge thanks, not just from me, but I think from the entire mobility community. It's 11 o'clock at night, and we can see the view looks amazing out there. So tell me, you're in Singapore, right?
Based in Singapore, have been living here, moved here for the job. It's been really nice quarantining, by the sea.
Wow, and it's an amazing view you've got out there. That's your balcony out the back there, is it?
Thank you. Yes.
It's looking great. So 11 o'clock at night. So we're going to keep you up till midnight. So I don't know. You should have a beer or something to hand at that time of night, or a glass of wine or something. Anyway, let me bring in our other guests. So we've got, as ever, we've got Julia. So hi, Julia, and thanks again for being on the show. And Julia, what are you going to be talking to us about today? I think you're on mute, Julia.
Sorry.
What are you talking to us about today, Julia?
Yeah, China, Singapore, Australia, and the EU.
Okay, well, a lot to be getting on there, a lot in the news. Certainly with Australia, I know there's been a huge amount in the news going on there. And also, let me just bring in our fourth guest, my producer, the wonderful Michelle. Hey, Michelle. So have you been doing some research? Have you got stuff to
of course.
tell us about today?
Of course, yep. We're going to talk about some of the qualities and skills that make great mobility leaders, and we'll talk a little bit about how global mobility can best position itself for the future. So we'll be sharing some polls and discussions later on the show.
Cool. And Kerwin, you're a popular guy. We've already got over 160, coming close to 170 people now already online. I'm sure that will go up over the next few minutes as people come in. But we've got people from, just to let you know, where we're getting shout outs from Boston, from Tampa, from Phoenix, from Zurich, from Hanoi, from New York, from Bengaluru, Brooklyn, Jacksonville, Dallas, Baltimore, Edinburgh, and that's from Abigail Stevens. Hi from Edinburgh on Think Global Recruitment's 20th birthday anniversary. Well, happy birthday, Think Global. We've got Kristen from New York, more from Nikki Mayer from New York. Lisa Johnson, congratulations to Julia on her recent award. What? I haven't heard about this, Julia. What's your recent award?
Oh, it's just a silly award. Yeah. It was a Best Lawyers Award. Two partners in Fragment got it.
That's not silly at all. No,
yes.
Congratulations. We've got people from all over. From I see my colleague Scott Flicker from San Jose. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Scott. I miss Scott. I miss Scott a lot.
Yeah, great shot. Great shout out for you there, Scott. We're getting people from all over. Anyway, I won't read out all of them, but otherwise we'll be here all day reading out the comments and not getting into things. But let's just talk then. Let's just start about immigration. So, Kerwin, Michelle, I'm going to move you backstage for a bit, and let's just focus on our regular updates from Julia. So, Julia, what are you going to tell us today then?
Yes, I just wanted to start with China, because we always start with China, but things in China, are improving, but we've talked the last couple of weeks about the situation in Beijing, and people who are in Beijing are being advised not to travel. But if you do travel, you will have to quarantine if you move to other parts of China. And what the authorities in China have done is they've actually designated sort of high risk, low risk areas. And it's now, the summer, the weather's warmer, and lots of assignees are taking holiday, but unusually they're actually taking holiday in China, but they obviously have to be mindful of internal quarantine arrangements. And the other thing is that last week I explained that there were now 19 countries which the Ministry of Foreign Affairs were issuing these letters of invitation to. And I went through the countries, and also 7 countries where the authorities are issuing visas for new applications. And I just want to say that although in the last week we haven't seen any more countries, we've seen a lot more applications. But I want to remind you all what my colleague Becky Shear said, is that the way to get success in these applications is don't worry about the epidemiology. It doesn't seem to matter what country you're coming from. You've just got to stress the economic importance of the role. And the more junior the role, the more you have to explain it, because it's not quite so obvious. So I would urge you all to do that. The second thing I want to say is there's been a really good LinkedIn conversation with Brian, and Paul Barnes started it, and Jeremy Chander, about short-term business visitors, and whether we're going to see a big spike in short-term travel. But I would like to say that this evolution of the travel bubbles has not been as successful as we hoped. And the travel bubbles were to cut the quarantine days by 14 to 72 hours. But we recently had someone who was on one of these travel bubble flights with a young child, and because she was expecting to only be quarantined for 72 hours, there wasn't a lot of thought about what's going to happen with the quarantine. And unfortunately, someone was on that flight who was asymptomatic. They were negative for COVID when they got on the flight, but when they landed and had the test, they were positive. So the whole plane was quarantined for 14 days. And it was actually very difficult for this person. So I think what we're finding is that the travel bubble's good idea. You know, we got Brian, we all got very excited about it, didn't we? But actually in practice, they're really quite difficult. And just moving to Singapore, it was also interesting in Singapore that the Prime Minister of Singapore said in the Asian Summit a few days ago that, you know, he wanted all of the Asia Pac countries to sort of work together, lifting the travel ban. But I'm going to say in a minute that the travel ban situation in Europe is an utter fiasco. So I think, given that that's the EU, which actually does have a kind of joint membership, I think it's a very good intention, but it's hard to see how there can be, you know, all this reciprocity. And quickly,
the problem is what's the alternative?
Yeah, I know. I agree. In Singapore, and this is really interesting, and Kerwin said that he's got some comments on this, but in the elections, which are going to be later this week, the opposition party were raising the fact that maybe there was too much immigration in Singapore. And the current government really pushed back and said, no, 60,000 foreigners have actually lost their jobs and lost their employment passes. But I think it's a good example of how we're seeing this politicization of immigration, what we're seeing in America and now even in Singapore. And quickly just moving on to Australia. In Australia, you know, things were quite good, but, you know, there's this big spike of cases in Melbourne. And allegedly, according to Teresa Liu, who's my partner in Australia, head of our Australian practice, it was actually caused by the fact that the security guards had allegedly close contact with some of the people that were actually quarantining in a hotel. So this is how the outbreak started in Melbourne. And what we've seen is the first time since 1919, so over 100 years, they've actually shut the border between New South Wales and Victoria. So the last time they did that was at the time of the Spanish flu. And while I was on the phone to Teresa, they actually put the level up to level 3, the Victorian government did, which is the highest warning. So, but there is a top tip I want to give you about Australia. So if you want to bring someone into Australia who is outside of, you know, who just wouldn't get in because of the travel ban, we are seeing successful applications. If you already have a visa and you want to return to Australia, what happens is you have to apply and explain why you want to go in. And there are exemptions for critical skills, but they're being widened. But you have to apply, those applications are to the Border Force Commissioner, and that's where the applications are adjudicated. But what I want to say to you is that if you have someone you want to bring in and it's a new application, this is not a returning person, it's a new application, it's really, really advisable to make a two-prong approach to the Border Force Commissioner and to the Australian authorities. And that's the best way to get people in. In New Zealand, it's very, very difficult, but that's my top tip from Australia.
Okay, well, you heard it here first, guys.
Yeah, so very lastly on Europe. So in the UK, just want you to know that the visa application centres still closed in the US, but we think we're going to get a decision this week to open them. The second thing is that the 31st of July is the end point for the concession on COVID-19, and we don't think that the Home Office are going to extend it. So you've got to really think what you're going to do about these people. And the final point is, I was saying to Brian, I'm really excited because I'm actually going on a plane next week, but the e-gates apparently are not working or deliberately not working when you come back to the UK. So, you know, that's going to add a lot of time to journey time. And then the very last thing I wanted to say is on Europe. I spent a bit of time last week saying, you know, Europe had made these recommendations that they had 14 countries, and if you're from those countries, you should be allowed into the EU. Well, some countries decided not to accept any of these recommendations. And so you have an absolutely farcical situation going on in Europe. So what, by way of example, Belgium said they're not accepting any of these 14 countries. They say 9 don't meet the health tests, and 5, there's no reciprocity for people coming from Europe. But then the Netherlands said they would accept all 14. So if you're a Canadian, you can fly to Amsterdam and drive to Belgium in 1 hour, but you can't fly to Brussels. So, it's a real minefield.
Okay, so thank you for that. And I'll just bring Kerwin into the stream. Are you there, Kerwin?
Yes, hi.
Hey, we got you. Cool. So tell me, Singapore. I mean, you're in Singapore, and Julia talked about it. What are you seeing in terms of immigration on the ground there? Is it very problematic at the moment?
No, not at all. I think whether Singapore or the rest of the world, globalization is taking a turn right now. I think it's never about immigration. It's never about mobility. For me, the leading indicators that I follow are where trade and investments are flowing. That's where immigration will flow. When we started to see countries, right, GDP contraction, unemployment rising, countries will protect themselves. But then you've also seen some of the signs prior to the pandemic that were accelerated during the pandemic. Border controls, that was there before. Export, restrictions during the pandemic. Companies were hurt with their supply chain. They will remember that. Where they place their investments in the future will change. COEs, shared services, all of the other stuff, how they sell will be different. Countries competing for the same revenue. That's why you see tech companies get taxed differently in EU. Trade wars, tariffs, different places. All of these things have been happening before, will just accelerate. And I think wherever trade and investments flow, that's why I heard updates from Julia around travel bubbles within region, across countries where they have trade partnerships. That's where immigration will flow and the companies will follow.
Cool. And we're getting a few questions and comments coming in. Let me just sort of post a couple of these. This is from Irene Bacarda. It would be good to clarify that the recent list with non-EU 15 countries that can now come to the EU is based on the traveller's place of residence and not on their citizenship. Yeah.
Yes, good point, Irene. Yes, I should have clarified that. Well done. That's a really good point. Also, there is another good point, which is that you can still, there is still the exception to the travel ban. And one of them is that economic exception, if it's really important economically for your country. And most countries are actually adopting that. So that's another thing to think of. A lot of US citizens can come in under that.
Okay, and just a few more comments here. Any idea when the restrictions for new applications for employment passes in Singapore will be lifted? Sorry, for employment passes in Singapore will be lifted.
Yes. Well, it will depend. I mean, you can make the applications, but it will depend on when the travel ban is lifted.
Okay, and then again, I think it's more a comment than a question. I think what is important is how fast a COVID test can be done in order to avoid quarantine. Hong Kong and China are very effective and results are available within 6 hours. However, have to be performed every 3 days, I believe. Okay, well, that's every 3 days. That is going to be thing. And here, there's more thanks, people. Julia, people really do appreciate your comments. And you too, and we're going to get onto this. Kerwin has some of the most amazing perspectives and insights. So let's get on to that. Let's start. Actually, I'll bring in Michelle too. Where's Michelle? There's Michelle. And I just want to so I'll just get rid of that banner, and we're going to move on. So Kerwin, I want to start talking to you, Kerwin. Now, you've got 2 jobs. You've got your day job, which is the head of mobility at HPE, but then you've got your I would say your evening job. But looking at you now, obviously you do your day job in the evening anyway. But you've got your other job as chair-elect of Worldwide ERC. And I thought maybe just start off by talking a little bit about ERC. I think there's a lot of love out there for ERC. A lot of people, think of ERC as being, the industry trade body. but I'm not. I think there's a lot more people who love ERC than actually get involved. And you obviously are someone who's really got involved with ERC. How did you start? How did you get involved with ERC?
This is a good story. ERC is special for me. I got into my first ERC 2014 Chicago by accident. It wasn't part of my itinerary. I happened to be there. I attended. I got inspired by the final panel that Peggy was hosting. It was about analytics. Out of the blue, I approached her after the session. I got inspired. I whispered to her, I told her, I will show you what amazing looks like in 2 years. I didn't even have the job at the time yet. I was still running talent acquisition. So from that time on, I got my way into the global gig that I have right now. And it's just amazing how generous a lot of the people in ERC, the mobility community out there. So every time I'd go to the US, I'd be in the office of another mobility leader. I'd connect with consultants within our supply chain and even outside, even companies I don't have a contract with. People have been so generous. So at some point, eventually, I got myself into ERC with the intent of being able to give back in the same way that I've benefited, trying to reciprocate this back to ERC.
And there you go from Rosanna. I remember that session in Chicago. So there you go. Anyway, what I'd like to do though is bring Michelle back on stream. And Michelle, we're talking here about what good looks like, and I want to get on to both what good looks like and maybe a bit later what great looks like, and move it one stage further. But I think you've been doing a little bit of research, haven't you? So I'm told regarding what skills most vital. So do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yes. So the question of the week is, what do you think is the one most important quality or skill needed to successfully manage a mobility program? I'll hold off on sharing the results and ask for some of the audience feedback and really the options that we had, but there are many, were either attention to detail, responsiveness, excellent problem solving, and the ability to multitask. So which one do you think is the most important skill or quality to have? Again, we'd love to hear from the audience out there, and perhaps Kerwin, you could share your perspective.
And by the way, Kerr, we've got Peggy on the line. So love from Peggy, obviously ex-ERC. I never wondered what amazing looked like after you shared that comment. I still remember that exchange. Congrats on being the chair for 2021.
Very grateful for the opportunity.
So anyway, let's talk about what skill do you think is most vital to do your job?
Well, for me, I go back to evergreen elements that hold through good times, tough times, and they are my 3 C's. First C for me, customer at the center. How I behave, how I think, how I design, listening to them, understanding what helps them, what harms them. Customer at the center. Number 2 for me is command of the program. Whatever role I was in at HR, talent acquisition, doing some payroll stuff, expense reimbursement, other roles, command of my program, understanding my numbers, analytics, insights, what's working, what's not, what's being abused, what's not. And then 3rd C for me is a culture of collaboration with our community, whether it's HR, whom we share custody of the same customer, collaborate with them, or across our mobility community. You'd be surprised in terms of how much, how many times over I've seen breakthrough just by collaborating with others across our community. 3 C's.
Okay, and we're getting comments coming in. I mean, maybe before we sort of release the poll results, we could flick up some of the comments here. I mean, I'll just flick some up. That's from Bindu, I think, in India. Empathy and stress management. I think we're. You got some there too, haven't you? That you can put up there, Michelle.
Yep.
But we're getting all these comments coming through. There's empathy and multitasking. Khadija Islam, who's also been on the show before. Problem solving. Deb Crouch, problem solving. problem solving is an important one. I mean, we're getting, we gave people a choice, didn't we? Remind us what the choices were, Michelle.
Yeah, the choices were attention to detail, responsiveness, excellent problem solving, and the ability to multitask were the options. And then, somebody commented to say that they went for the ability to multitask because it includes attention to detail, responsiveness, and excellent problem solving.
Well, they say that men can't multitask. It's a female skill. So anyway, I try my best. But what were the results? Tell me about the results.
So overwhelming respondents said that excellent problem solving was the one most important skill set to have. That was 57% of the respondents. 22% of respondents said responsiveness. 13% said the ability to multitask, and 9% had attention to detail.
Okay. And what about you? I mean, Kerwin, does that accord with you? I mean,
yes, it lines up with for me the first C for me, putting the customer at the center all the time, whether it's empathy, listening, understanding what they're going through, or solving problems for the customer.
Okay, we're going to get on to great, and I mean amazing. I think was your word. We use the word great, but we're going to get. As I said, we're going to get on to good to great. But what I'd like to do for a moment actually is actually talk a little bit about HPE, if I may. Now, a couple of questions. I mean, Hewlett Packard famously was started in a garage in the Bay Area. But you're not in the Bay Area. Well, you might be a different bay, but that's the South China Sea, I think, behind you, isn't it? You're in Singapore. So that's something pretty radical. Do you think it's important that that the mobility team is where the assignees are, or where the headquarters is, or it doesn't matter? I mean, it's just the right person for the job. I mean, how do you go about sort of selecting where the mobility team should be? I mean, how did HPE go about it? Because you in Singapore with a company in the Bay Area is slightly unusual.
Well, I'll start with a little bit of my history to explain that, and then I'll address the question about today and the future. The role was actually offered to me to be in the Bay Area. I took that role until my wife family said, no, we're not moving. So we stayed here, and I'm just glad they retained the offer for me to run the job. And in the 80 years of HPE history, the role has never been placed outside of headquarters, and it's never been played by somebody who looks different, who looks like me. So yeah, I'm just really proud of that, and that's how I approach this job. It's a privilege that I have to earn every day, because really at the end of the day, this is an opportunity, and I'm not throwing away my shot for those Hamilton stuff. In terms of my view for today and the future, my encouragement for others, we wouldn't be credible mobility professionals, mobility leaders, if the answer is not all about the talent. Wherever the best talent is, that's where the job should be going. We live in a world, in a lot of companies, where it's very dispersed. I lead a very dispersed global team over the years, even prior to mobility, and that's how the world is. And we just have to follow where talent is. Okay,
so tell me a bit about HP. I mean, I know you've won 15 Emma Awards from the Forum for Expatriate Management, obviously a company that is very dear to my own heart. And I think that may actually be a record for anybody. 15, that's pretty darn impressive. I've won one. I invented the frigging thing. But you've got 15 of these awards. So tell me, you've obviously done something pretty dramatic and amazing in terms of transforming the mobility function or the mobility program at HP. So can you just tell us a little bit about your journey? And and I know you had that conversation with Peggy about what amazing was. Just tell us a bit about what you've done, and maybe start off by just telling us a bit about the program. I mean, the volume, for example, how many moves you do, so people got an idea.
The company has changed a lot since the day I got the role, end of 2015. At the time, the volume was 7,000. Right now, the number that I tell others, around 2,400, domestic, international, one-way, two-way, all the other travel patterns, posted worker, frequent travelers, etc. So in terms of a journey, well, for me, every journey starts with why. And for us, we serve a business as customers, and we need to understand their why of mobility. Our why is simply about how talent mobility enables and accelerates business transformation and success. And in doing so, part of our why is hopefully we propel the practice of practice forward by leading the reinvention of global mobility. And that's why in 2017 we started looking for validation, and that's when engaging in FEM was helpful for us to validate us. So we did that 4 rounds, and then we stopped. So that's where it started, journey why. And then afterwards we started figuring out what's that scale we want to play within, realizing that mobility is beyond compliance and beyond moving people from A to B. It's knowing that what we do every day on the basics of compliance and operations earn us the right to play in the higher value arena of to realize the why of mobility, whether it's about talent, and for me the highest level is about how we synergize with pay, performance, rewards. So that's the scale we set before us. And then the third aspect of that journey was we were intent from day one to continue to apply widely accepted HR philosophies in mobility. I want to keep it simple, rely on messaging that is familiar and accepted by HR and the manager. Then it lets me do one less selling from a change management perspective.
Okay, and I presume that's a journey that is continuing. I presume that one of the things that makes a great program is the fact that it carries on evolving.
Correct. So I do 3-year terms. I basically commit to the job for 3 years. So we completed the first 3 years roadmap, and I'm on my second 3-year roadmap. And it just coincides with my ERC tenure as well.
Okay, and I'm going to bring Michelle back in because we've actually been doing some research on this too. And I mean, we've been talking about a good mobility program, and we've been talking about a great mobility program. And I referenced back, that discussion you had with Peggy about amazing and what amazing looks like. So tell me about, Michelle, tell me about the research that we've been doing regarding great, the journey from good to great.
Sure. Yeah. So again, the distinction between the qualities and skill set and then what's most vital to being great. We asked the audience, the LinkedIn world, what they thought the most vital quality would be. The options being empathy, which we saw a lot in the previous question come up, technical skills, political skills, and then we had a category for other where people could write in some comments. So I'll share those in a few minutes. And so, trying to make that distinction to our viewers, our listeners, what do you think is that vital to being a great mobility manager?
So the choice is really, if people could start feeding on LinkedIn. I know there's always a time lag of a couple of minutes between us talking and it going live on LinkedIn. But the choices are empathy, technical ability, political skills, and just go into those. Empathy is really, I suppose, how you manage to handle the assignees. Technical ability speaks for itself, your knowledge of tax, immigration, other issues. Political skills is really about how you manage the line and how you manage upwards within your own organization. And then other, of course, you can put in anything you want for other. Seeing comments coming in now, they just started coming in the comments. Let me just see what we've got here. Empathy.
Votes for empathy.
Empathy. what's this from Peggy? Service relationships are an extension of brand, and those you treat their brand extensions with dignity. Dignity will always win more. So we're getting empathy. I'm trying to think. There's definitely a bit of a thing going on here for empathy. Empathy, hands down, says Mike Fitzgerald.
I did see somebody make a comment earlier about having a sense of humor.
Oh, I did. Yeah, sense of humor. Khadija, knowledge and political skills. So we're getting different views coming in. But so let's just see. I mean, why don't you tell us what the poll found?
Well, the poll and our current listeners are aligned. Empathy was the overall winner at 52%, followed by technical skills at 21%, political skills at 19%, and then for other, we got comments like patience and persistence, and stakeholder management, both internal and external. And I would say, all of the above for me make sort of the definition of that really great mobility manager.
Okay. So here's a question for you, Kerwin, and also for the audience. I mean, I just love the engagement we get from the audience. We get literally hundreds of comments. We probably get, I added it up once, I think we get a new comment every 5 seconds as we go through the 60 minutes. But question really for you, Kerwin, is empathy seems to be the overriding one, followed by political skills, well, and technical ability, about the same. But empathy was the overriding one. Are these skills you can teach? Can you teach empathy? Can you teach political skills? I appreciate you can teach technical ability, but the others, or are people just born with them?
I totally believe you can teach them. And if I can expound on that with sharing a few examples.
Please do, yeah.
So I'll start with how programs transcend from good to great, and then I'll talk about mobility leaders transcending from good to great. Because I think they're very connected, and it should be expressed in terms of what's real, what's tangible, what's results. For me, where programs transcend from good to great, it should be based on engagement, and that's where I think empathy plays in. Many focus on satisfaction, then experience. I think when we play in the arena of engagement, we can have sustained success. Specific examples in terms of what we're doing to show empathy and via engagement. Number one, a few weeks ago you did an EO on immigration. So part of our program, New Style of Engagement, we're rolling out town halls, webcasts, where we talk about not just awareness of what's changing, but we go from awareness to raising appreciation, what it means to you, our message for you, message of retention, awareness, appreciation, and advocacy. What we are doing to influence, we cannot guarantee the results, but what we're doing. Number one. Number two, engagement. We have started to do persona-based approach to content. We have changed the way we do our web presence, and then we're doing subscription-based content push. So based on analytics, I know what individuals are going through, what managers are going through when they post a rec. I want to compete for that rec. Conversations individuals would need to have with their manager, with their spouse, engagement, number two. And then number three, the easiest for me return to investment that I've made in the program. Very early on in 2016, I started to bring face-to-face back, whereas other mobility programs invested a lot in technology. I think that's important. But what generated the best results fastest is a few things by bringing face-to-face and one-on-ones back. Imagine this. I'm giving people one-on-one with their immigration lawyer. They can discuss not just the transaction, they can bring family members, they can talk about a path to citizenship, to green card, etc. Building a relationship, empathy, not just transactions, strategy, conversation, listening to the unspoken. No amount of chatbot can replace that. So empathy is important, and I try to replicate that via engagement. From a mobility leader perspective, I think it's really our ability to build business cases and make those clear and important to our stakeholders. So it's a little bit of what we heard, stakeholder management, politics maybe, but for me, building business cases and making sure that they are clear and important to my stakeholder, not to myself. So if I'm having a conversation with HR, my argument will be HR perspective, not about us. The world doesn't revolve around mobility. We revolve around the customer at the center. If it's with payroll, different set of argument, building business cases.
Okay, and we've got a question coming in for you. And in a way, it connects up with empathy. This is from Gusharan, and he said, question for Kerwin, how important is cultural diversity for you?
Very important. No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just saying it's a big question, but yeah.
Yes, it's something that I've learned to appreciate a lot more later on in my career. And definitely I build, I have a team, mostly minorities, even in the US. I believe in differences in perspectives, and it for me, it role models who we are, why of mobility. But it's really, for me, more personal than that. If you let me a little sharing, I'm somebody who's really more career first. Growing up, I'm motivated by challenge, something never been done before, or where others have failed. I want that, but that changed a lot. I learned to temper my appetite when I had a daughter. She factors into a lot of my career moves. Leaving my prior employer. I've only had 2 employers in 24 years. I've had more.
With Intel before, weren't you?
What?
You were with Intel before?
With Intel, yes, for about 13 years. So I've had more citizenship changes than employers. Believe me. To Julie's point, I'm voting on Friday. So, again, leaving my prior employer or saying no to US, a lot of those were really family-based decision. And at some point, I learned to be I want to be a force for good in my work life, so I can hopefully make my daughter proud. And hopefully my actions will be an example for others. So hopefully she grows up in a society that can be more equal. And we try to produce results and actions associated with that. If I can share just two examples. One is, again, how we put a lot more emphasis in our supply chain, working with women-led, women-owned businesses. So our DSP in the Bay Area, small company, women-led, women-owned. And then this content development company that I found in Manila, 25 employees, 22 are women. They do a lot of my content stuff. But the one initiative I did that I'm really, really proud of is called a program called Career Reboot. Maybe in the market, it's more referred to as returnship. So I was given the opportunity towards end of 2018 to lead this initiative, to design, develop, deploy this program. It's catering to individuals who are out of the workforce, maybe to take care of children who are older now, they can come back to the workforce, or take care of elderly. So I work with a not-for-profit company to design, develop that program, and then we were able to implement that in the US and then in India. And we were able to convert the whole first cohort out of India, and give them full-time employment afterwards this January. So really proud of that. And again, I'd be remiss if I'm not making this plug. I know within our mobility community, there's a lot of people probably who've lost their jobs or who have job security challenges. And at some point next month, I want to be able to reach out to that, part of our community who needs help, and bring in some of my partners and people who help in my journey. So hopefully they could be of assistance for the individuals who need those. Thank you, Brian.
No, but this whole question of inclusion, I find quite fascinating. I mean, we only have to look at the difference between mobility managers and the people who are moving. I mean, it seems to me, and I don't have the demographics on this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. It seems to me that the majority of mobility managers are female, but the majority of people being moved are male. I still think you get relatively few female assignees. I mean, many more than you did years ago, but relatively few compared to the proportion that are actually in the mobility function itself. I mean, is that something you've experienced, or you got views on, or what can we do to, to maybe make that, less unequal?
Well, I share that observation, and if I look at it more from a broader HR organization, because the majority of my career were all over HR, that's totally true. And I think it's about society and culture, what we were told growing up, who goes into an HR career, who goes into an engineering field. I finished engineering school. I don't have any business to be in HR, but I got here. So I think to make those changes, big culture shifts, I don't pretend to have the answers. What I know I can do are actions every day that promotes equality. So I have a team that's really all women, made up of minorities, all over the world, and I try to promote them from a supply chain perspective. When I was running talent acquisition, part of the rule was when we give a short list, long list of candidates, I have to influence it at that point. That diversity has to be present at that point.
Okay, and we're getting comments coming in as well. Heartwarming to hear how you put your family first before your career when it came to the crux. Appreciate your candor, Kerwin. Thank you. Being an example our children want to follow is one achievement to be proud of. I'll certainly put that. Jacqueline Van Haften. Most male movers have female partners, so still a balance. Yeah, I sort of agree with that, Jacqueline, but it's a question really of, primary earner and whether there's working, whether the spouse of the spouse is female can work or not work in the situation. And also it raises the question, why are employers favoring male assignees over, or is it self-selection? What's going on there?
If I can share a perspective, what I've seen, and again, this was new to me in the past year, looking at just the U.S. demographics. I think because at some point in an individual's career, they would be forced to leave the workforce. And again, the sad reality is, the hard reality is, most of the time it happens to women. And that's why we put up a business case within HPE, our team, the team that I report into. And then in the past year, we deployed a program that's like 6 months fully paid parental leave, male and female. If you're adopting, it will also be allowed 6 months fully paid for both parents, and then some additional flexible work arrangements to be able to help them transition back to the workforce, let them work the schedule and the pace that they need, so we don't lose women from the workforce. And we put a lot of emphasis as well on women in tech jobs. That's why we did the career reboot. That's why we have a lot of these, to not just do the talk, it's cheap, but to take, to put in the action and the investment.
Okay, and I mean, certainly it almost brings us on to the subject of the whole question of employee experience and engagement, because to create a great mobility program, and I know you touched on it in a bit, we've got to get a great employee experience and great level of employee engagement and indeed partner engagement. I mean, is there stuff you're doing at HPE around employee experience that you can share with us?
Yes, absolutely. I just in the past year, leading to my current 3-year roadmap to 2022, we commissioned a lot of research. We interviewed people who were moving, managers, HR, to understand what they're going through, and then to put in the investment afterwards. And then we did benchmarking in terms of what other tech companies are doing, and then we went back to our why and our winning aspiration. If I give people the shiny new, whatever tool, they'll probably be happy. But that's not the message that we want to give them. It's not to be happy. We don't want to give them the Disneyland experience, your Disney experience. You'll be happy for a day and you'll remember that for the rest of your life. What we're doing is something that's very close to me. Mobility allowed me, again, because of mobility, moving from Manila to Singapore and accepting that job in the US allowed me to break sort of glass ceilings in terms of what's possible in terms of roles. But at the same time, moving from Manila to Singapore changed my life and my next generation, access to education, the future that my daughter will have, very different. And that's the message. That's the winning aspiration we have, that we are trying to convey to the people we move. You will not get everything you ask for. You will not have the shiniest, fanciest tools. We try to give them that, but I prefer to invest in their career, to retain them and give them a future that, what I went through, I want others to have.
It is quite amazing what you've achieved, Kerwin. And I said, I've been reading some of the comments. I flicked a few up on screen. The love that we're seeing for you and the people. I know you come across, and this is a comment people have made, as a really humble guy. But the comments that people are coming out there, I think ERC is truly blessed to have you as its next chairman. And I don't want to embarrass you further. So what I will do is I'll bring on Michelle, because we've got just a little bit more research. And Michelle, I know we've been talking about global mobility and about what good is and what great is. And I think we've done some research about how the function can best position itself for the future. I don't know if you could share that with us.
Sure. So the question we asked was, like you said, how can mobility best position itself for the future? And the options we posed were to do the essentials better, to be strategic, to use technology to free up time, and to develop cost-saving ideas. So those were the options in the poll. So I'd be curious to hear the thoughts and comments from those who are out there listening and watching today. I did see a question to Kerwin while we wait for that to roll in. Here it was, Kerwin, what role does mobility play in HP's talent management strategy? Maybe you could address that while we're waiting for some folks to comment on positioning of mobility for the future.
I'll use examples to make it real and people could, transferable stuff. So I look at talent based on different segments: early career, university, fresh grad, early career, experienced, and then executive. Let me focus on early career and university. So we've invested a lot of time, this exciting period for us, whilst every move is sort of frozen right now. We invested a lot of partnership with university recruitment. So we are going to university together. Imagine the difference in experience and the value proposition to candidates. If you are receiving a job offer versus you receiving a job offer and a transfer package together, you will compare job. A lot of other companies don't do that together. And I've learned in my past running TA, and mobility was on the side job for me, to do that when I'm poaching talent from my competitors. Everybody would have a job offer for you, but if I show you more numbers on the transfer package, it looks more appealing. And then there's less double dipping between sign-on bonuses, et cetera, and the package that you put together. So that's an example of how you can see that fit together. And then for me, don't stop there. At some point, you need to keep knocking on the door of how could I have a lot more synergy with performance and productivity. If you can influence that, and if you can influence it at a level that's fundamental, then your success becomes more sustainable, because the engagement with talent is, and then managers doing individual moves. For me, that's the retail level engagement. You will win, that's fine, but it's dependent on the individuals around who share the same goal. Whereas if you put it on the fundamentals, it will self-sustain.
And where does mobility, how does mobility link in with talent at HP? Do you sit within the compensation and benefits function or the talent function, and what are the reporting lines?
I was so waiting for this question because I've heard it debated so many times over, it doesn't stop. So my position is as simple as, it doesn't matter where you connect, for as long as you behave like you need to have a relationship with everybody.
Great answer, love it.
I've started doing mobility here and there, little bits. When I was at Intel, I was given the project to move all of the mobility function from country to shared services. And then they, part of my deal at the time when I'm moving jobs, I have to take care of the job, do the engineering, and then transfer them. So I did that a little bit as a side job on top of others. And then at HP, initially when I was running TA, mobility reported into me, and then TA reported into talent. And then afterwards, I was made to report into rewards, Comp and Ben, and then that's where I sit right now. But the moment mobility leaders think that their ability to achieve, greater success depends on where they report into, then they're limiting themselves.
That's great.
Okay, and I mean, this was the question, and I think we've had some comments coming through. I don't know. Maybe I'll flick them up, Michelle, and maybe you can talk to some of the comments that you're seeing there. But we're getting. So we had strategy. We've had technology to free up time. Strategic and wise use of technology. Strategic for sure, but doing the essentials better is so important. Getting those details right is critical to employee experience and program management. And Carmen agreed with that. But anyway, why don't you tell us what the research found?
Well, yet again, our viewers and listeners today are aligned with the polls, with 63% of the respondents saying being strategic is how global mobility can best position itself for the future. That was followed by 21% of respondents saying using technology to free up time, 8% saying develop cost-saving ideas, and just 6% saying doing the essentials better.
Cool. I mean, I find that quite interesting because to me, being strategic, saying that you want to be strategic is easy. The question is actually how you get to doing the strategic. And the problem I find with mobility professionals that I've come across over the years is they're so busy doing the urgent stuff.
Yeah.
They don't have the time to do the important stuff. And I remember a line that I heard is that you're juggling all these balls in the air. You've got 5 or 6 balls that you're juggling in the air. How do you manage without dropping any of the balls? And the simple answer is put some of them down. Just juggle the ones you're able to juggle with. And to me, that is probably the best argument for maybe working with vendors better, outsourcing as much as you can. So you can, because the one thing I think you can never outsource is responsibility. But the admin stuff, try and outsource or use suppliers, that you've delegated, or if not outsourced, you've delegated out maybe to a center of excellence or something, so you can actually focus your mobility function on being strategic. And if you don't do that, I think the trap we all get caught in is we get so busy doing the everyday stuff that is mundane but hugely urgent, like the person being stopped at the border, that you can't actually focus on doing the strategic stuff that's truly important. I think this is where there's huge credit to Kerwin, because I think what you've achieved at HP is nothing short of remarkable in terms of the way you've moved it, and those 15 awards I think are very well deserved.
Well, there's a lot of people who made it happen, and then you mentioned again the engagement within our community, within our supply chain, with our providers. That's very key to definitely a lot of the success we've had. And then Scott was in the call, earlier, hopefully still in, and the relationship I have with him was strong example of that. The SOW wasn't the boundary condition; it was the baseline. It can go more. And I remember before even I had the job formally, I was spending time with Scott, with other partners, with Robert Horsley, and then several others, to just ask them, if you were leading this program, what would, again, that I kept using these words, what would amazing look like? What would you be doing differently that's never been done before? Something you aspire to do, and then feed from that, be inspired by that, and then keep engaging them that way. I've had a lot of relationships like that. And the most powerful recent example is really in the past year, I was part of, you had Morgan and Steve last week. I just pitched to them. I told them, I'm running out of ideas. I'm trying to build a 3-year roadmap. So I want to crowdsource ideas. So we did a few roundtables. I went through Boston, Chicago, Austin, a couple of others, maybe I forgot. And we benefited from crowdsourcing ideas, other HR leaders in the room, mobility leaders in the room. And we just asked ourselves the simple question, no slides, no presentation. Why do I keep going back to this word? We asked them, what would be cool? What would be amazing to have that you don't have today? It's not something that you can buy in the market today. Something you don't have. Something if you have, you'd be it. And then we got into some really nice, cool stuff that we are deploying later this year.
Okay, we're pretty much out of time. Let me just bring Julia back onto screen. Hi, Julia.
Hi.
Thanks again for your update, and obviously you'll be back with us next week. I mean, we've talked about what amazing looks like. It's a subject I definitely want to pick up on. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in the future. I suppose the shameless plug is we are doing a demo in 15 minutes time, which you can get via the Benevo website. And we like to think that the Amazon style experience that we're bringing into mobility is pretty amazing. I mean, obviously there's lots of ways of being amazing, but we think from a tech point of view, that's pretty cool. And if anybody's interested, then I would recommend you quickly check that out. But all that really remains, I think, I just want to thank Michelle for all her research. I mean, you've been an absolute wonderful research you've been doing. It certainly added a whole new focus to these shows, having the weekly polls.
My pleasure.
As I said, Julia, as ever, your insights are awesome. Again, we get a lot of love for you from the listeners and the viewers. But this week, Kerwin, you're very much our special guest, and I look forward to having you back at some point in the future. Certainly when you've got your chair hat on, and we can talk even more about ERC.
So looking forward to that. And Brian, Michelle, thank you so much for the opportunity. More power to you. What you are doing, bringing our community together, harnessing the power of community, is truly inspiring during these times. So thank you very much on behalf of the community.
Well, thank you, and I truly appreciate that. So anyway, all that really remains is for me to say goodbye to everybody out there, and goodbye from all our panel. So goodbye, everybody.